Hi, Rick Hansen here on Amazing Greats. Well, you may have heard of C.S. Lewis, who wrote the Chronicles of Narnia and dozens of other books. He's likely known as one of the century's greatest writers and is the subject of a new stage play and now a film called The Most Reluctant Convert, the untold story of C.S. Lewis. From atheist to Christian apologist, this movie is a riveting account told by actor Max Mclean. Max is the founder and artistic director of Fellowship for the Performing Arts in New York and is our guest on this premiere episode of Amazing Greats. I hope you're as captivated by this man and this story as I was. What a great opportunity it is for me to take a few minutes to talk with Max Mclean. And Max is new in my world as I had picked up, Max, just kind of so you know, picked up a book from a guy who I'd heard everybody talking about, C.S. Lewis, and the book that I read was Mere Christianity.
Yeah.
And I was just amazed because you can't just sit down and read that book. You read a little bit and then you say, wait a minute, what did he just say? So that brings us to our conversation today, because let me do a little introduction of you. You are an award-winning actor and the founder of an artistic group called the Fellowship for Performing Arts in New York City. You produced film and a lot of stage performances, and you're kind of the, in my world, you are C.S. Lewis because...
Well,
because I saw the movie and you were so good in that that I had to keep telling myself, no, this isn't C.S. Lewis, this is Max Mclean. So good. And so with that small and short introduction, tell us a little bit about how you, first of all, tell us who is C.S. Lewis. Can you put
yeah.
that, since you've spent a lifetime kind of getting to know this man?
Yeah. I would say if you were from Mars or something and somebody asked that question, uh, it would probably prompt a lot of other questions. But he is perhaps the most influential Christian writer and thinker of the past 100 years. And as a result of that, he has had so much to do with many, many people getting a deeper understanding of Jesus Christ, who he is, what he did, and putting it into kind of a perspective. So that's what he's known. He was an intellectual. He wrote dozens upon dozens of books. He was well known as a scholar in Romantic literature in Oxford. He taught at Oxford from 1925 to 1954. And then he was recruited to Cambridge, where he spent his last 9 years in 1963. He happened to die the same day that JF Kennedy was assassinated. So even though his obituary was on the front page of the New York Times, so was all that. But one might think that his influence over people's spiritual lives over the past since then, which would be 58 years now, one could argue that Lewis perhaps had more influence than even Kennedy.
Very interesting and so
Yeah,
true. You know,
yeah,
the impact at that moment may have been thrust toward Kennedy, but
yeah,
you're right. We think and are still gleaming the intellectual values of all of the things that he's written. And so I picked up a book not long ago. I heard about C.S. Lewis, had not really jumped into that, but I got Mere Christianity.
hmm,
And as I was picking up the book and reading it, and then I got the audio version too, so I could listen to it.
yeah.
The insight and the as you say, is so intellectual that you can't just get it all in one reading. You got to read it again.
No,
And
but
then,
what happens is, sometimes you hear intellectual stuff and it bores you. In Lewis's case, you hear something profoundly intellectual, but it intrigues you.
yes.
And you go, whoa, I don't quite get what he's saying, but he's saying something. you know? And it would behoove me to understand what he's saying, because it feels like my my life would be clearer, and my understanding of my purpose on earth would also be more understood if I understood what he was saying. Uh, Lewis read everything from the Greeks to the moderns. He had a steel trap mind that could remember everything, and he had this incredible ability to translate it into magnificent prose and speech, which he did. It was just extraordinary what comes out of his mouth. I think some people say he was one of the greatest writers of the last century. I think he was one of the greatest writers of all time.
Wow.
Uh, and because of the insights, the constellation of ideas, and you're almost like intellectually and almost emotionally shaking because you hadn't heard this stuff before, and you probably thought of Christianity as an obscure first century Jew. How could that person be the supreme God of the universe? That just doesn't make sense. And Lewis tells you, okay, let me tell you why.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, you're intrigued, and he's so much bigger. And then all of a sudden, the reality of Jesus, liar, lunatic, Lord, becomes very, very powerful, very real.
And it's not for lack. I mean, there's no lack of analogy, metaphors that he uses to try to explain what he's saying. I mean, he's
Yeah,
very
and
good at that.
he's so concrete, so clear, and uh, yeah. But of course, too, he was also, he had, he didn't grow up in the. Oh, actually, he did. He grew up in a church going home. He said he learned the doctrines of Christianity at boarding school from men who obviously believed them. He learned the doctrines, he says, as opposed to general uplift. And he said, this is growing up. And he said the effect was really strong. I feared for my soul, began to pray, read my Bible, attempted to obey my conscience. He said it didn't last. Many reasons for that. So, and then once he gave up the faith, uh, he said he became as non-moral as a human creature could be. He described himself of chastity, truthfulness, self-sacrifice. He said he thought as a baboon thinks of classical music. I mean, that's kind of the way he uses language.
Yeah.
He spoke of hating people he disagreed with and making up conversations which he could score points. But the Lord got hold of him. He was a vigorous debunker of Christianity, but the Lord got hold of him, and as a result of getting hold of him, he became one of the great apologists for Christianity.
And so that brings us to, as much as I want to talk about you in all of this as well, but just to kind of you know put into perspective the movie, which now this is really you're mostly a stage production and performer.
Yeah,
But you created this film, which is called The Most Reluctant Convert.
yeah,
And it is the untold story of C.S. Lewis. And I saw the movie, was intrigued, fascinated by his life. So let's just jump in and talk a little bit about him. But remind me that you're not C.S. Lewis, so that we do get back and talk about Max Mclean a little bit too. I want to know more about you yourself. So
well, first of all, I'm an American and Lewis is a Brit. So there's a big difference there. As soon as I open my mouth on this podcast, it's obvious that and Lewis had the plummiest of plummy voices.
Can you give us a little plummy a voice?
Uh,
Can you recite something, anything?
yeah, I'd have to. I'd have to. It says I'd have to figure out what. At 14, I ceased to be a Christian. At that age, one barely notices. All at school, all the teachers and book editors took it for granted that religion was some sort of endemic nonsense into which humanity tended to blunder. Uh, that's sort of one of the
Oh yeah.
lines. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that was and so when I first did my research on you, I was
Hmm.
expecting a Brit,
Yeah.
and then to find out that you are actually an immigrant to the United States and you went to the university in Texas.
Hmm.
So you are an all-American guy, but you came to this country way early. You were just like 4 years old or something like that,
That's
correct?
right. That's right.
So you
And the
spent the
first thing I
bulk
had
of
to
your
do
life
was
here.
learn the English language, and I've been working on it ever since.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell us. So let's what tell us a bit of the untold story. C.S. Lewis was an atheist.
Yeah. 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 So this, he moved from vigorous debunker to the most reluctant convert in all of England. Those are his words, not ours. Part of it was he he lost his mother to cancer when he was 9 years old. She was the foundation of the family. The family fell apart without her. He had a terrible relationship with his father after that. It started before that, but really solidified after that. Uh, and he says one of the things he regretted all his life was his relationship with his father. He never was able to make that right, and his father died just before he came to Christ. Uh, and then of course he saw the butchery of firsthand of trench warfare in World War One. And as a result of his lifelong experience, he had this he called ingrained pessimism, and he came to the conclusion either there's no God behind the universe, a God who's indifferent to good and evil, or worse, an evil God. Mm-hmm. And that sort of began to change, when he got to Oxford, and he met some really good people at Oxford, people like J.R. Tolkien, Owen Barfield, Hugo Dice, and many others. It's an illustrious group of people, and they sort of confronted him about his unbelief, and in due time, he came to a conclusion that his argument against God was that the universe was so cruel and unjust. But he asked himself, well, where did I get this notion of cruel and unjust? I call a line crooked because I have some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it cruel and unjust? If the universe has no meaning, I'd never know it has no meaning. He sort of came to the conclusion that Christianity doesn't solve the problem of pain, it creates it. because pain would not be a problem if you lived in an arbitrary universe, where things just happen. It's the cards you were dealt with, the cards you were dealt, the hand you were dealt. But Christianity becomes a problem when you have good assurance that behind the universe is a being who's righteous and good. So that's where he came to terms with what do I make of this God that I have to owe my allegiance to him. But that, of course, only made him a theist, and he had no idea about Jesus. He felt that he didn't understand how the life, and he said that I had no understanding of the incarnation. The God to whom he surrendered was not human, and of course Jesus is human. That's the whole picture. And he couldn't understand how the life and death of someone else could have anything to do with someone else 2,000 years ago. Yeah, could do anything for him now. What was the point of that? He didn't get that, and so he spent so much of his time exploring that, and he had such a eureka moment that he spent the rest of his life, imagining what the world might look like as seen from heaven.
Was there a eureka moment for him? Was there a moment that the light switched?
Well, he had a couple. One was to God, and his understanding of he went through stages. He was an atheist, a materialist. Then he sort of thought that the God of the philosophers was the least objectionable theory. And then from there, he began to really believe and trust into the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Like the God of the God of Moses, who heard in the burning bush, "Who are you?" And the burning bush replies, "I am." And he believed in that God, and that God was supreme, creator. And he owed all his allegiance to it. and it changed his worldview. But then later, that was a eureka moment where he said in the Trinity term 1929, I gave in and admitted that God is God, knelt and prayed, perhaps that night the most dejected, reluctant convert in all England. And so that was a moment, and that to him was a moment of despair.
Really?
Because
Yeah.
yeah, he thought, okay, now my life is not my own. I have to be obedient to this creature, but he realized that's the truth. I need to. This is ultimate reality, and I owe my whole. I know I owe my life and breath and everything else to him. And so I'm going to make it my duty to press on, to get to know that being,
Yeah.
and not too many people would do that, right? But he did that. And then, of course, the other eureka moment was, as he said, uh, that he when he started understanding the Gospels, and it's a bit of a long story, but J.R. Tolkien really made him understand the significance of the Gospels, and he saw the Gospel not just as precepts that just good little rules and regulations, but as a hero story about a man who was unjustly killed and then come to life again. And that this man claimed to be the son of that which is the giver of the moral law, the Ten Commandments, and also the awful presence atop Mount Sinai, and he claims that. And we take that claim way too lightly.
Yeah.
Either this man was a raving lunatic, or else he wasn't who he says he is. And if you accept that he wasn't a raving lunatic, then everything else becomes credible. That this man was and is. His death affects real change in our relation to this righteous and awful Lord. And so once he came to that conclusion, he said he remembers very well when, but hardly how, the final step was taken. I was being driven by my brother Warney to Whipsnade Zoo in the sidecar of a motorcycle one sunny afternoon in the summer of 1931. When I set out, I did not believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. When we reached the zoo, I did.
Unbelievable. So the film, the movie, has met with extreme delight by Christians and non-Christians alike all over the country, to the point where it was designed originally to be just a one-night showing, and then it carried on at multiple theaters across the country through the month of November. Correct?
Till December 2nd.
Till December 2nd.
Yeah, so it was supposed to be a one-night event. It lasted almost a month.
Yeah. And now, I want to just mention this now, and we'll mention it at the end too. That movie, that film is available streaming, and that's why this is a timely conversation, because right now, not available in theaters, but is available. Can you explain to us where and how?
Yeah, you can go to our website, cslewismovie.com, and it's called, it's video on demand. You can download it. You have till January 2nd, I think, to download it. And then once you start it, you have 72 hours to finish it. And that's available until January 2nd.
And I must say, in watching the movie, I first watched the trailer and I was intrigued by the trailer. And then I had an opportunity to see the movie itself, and how the movie is put together is fascinating, because it's you as C.S. Lewis in middle to late age, I think basically in the 50s somewhere, but your character interacts with the young scholar as well as the young child on the same screen in the same setting, and it was just an amazing way to pull this thing all together. Was that your idea, or you have a director that had that idea?
Yeah, that was Norman Stone. Yeah, because the play, it began as a stage play. Where, as you mentioned earlier, our production company, Fellowship for Performing Arts, is a theatrical production company based in New York. And we tell stories from a Christian worldview, theatrical stories from Christian worldview. We tour. And this was a touring production, and it did very, very well on tour. and it's going to go back on tour in next year. I thought there was a movie here, but I didn't know anything about movie making. Norman Stone's a good friend of mine, and he's a person I've known of for 30 years and then known as a friend for about 10 years. And we have a very similar vision. But he knows how to tell stories on stage. And so what he wanted, he wanted Lewis to live in his memories and have some of his memories come alive. So you have the older Lewis talking about a memory of his boyhood, and then you see the boy, and then you have an older Lewis talking about the young man Lewis, and you see that memory as well. And then he'd go live there and be in the memory with him, kind of like, in many ways, it's like Scrooge looking at his life.
Yeah. So now you, as a performer, you've done that stage play as the actor on stage, but you've done other things too. And one of the ones I watched, which I was fascinated by, is the Gospel of Mark.
Yes.
And what amazes me, and maybe I'm going to ask this question because I'm intrigued by the whole concept of being a one-man show, of carrying 90 minutes and captivating an audience by just your movement, your voice, and the words you're saying. That's got to be incredibly difficult to carry 90 minutes, not only just memorizing script, but knowing what to do at every moment during that 90 minutes. Explain yourself.
Well, you first of all have to have a good story to tell, as people that want to hear the story, because it is a loop interaction. It's a circuit, and so you're telling a story that they want to hear, and in the process, there's a combustion that goes on. That some very exciting things happen. Catharsis happens. And that's what's happened with the Lewis story. That's what happened with the Mark's gospel. It was just something I fell into because these were stories I wanted to tell, and they happened to find an audience that wanted to hear them. Lewis has a huge legion of fans, and then people like you that are getting to know him. And most of the time when you get to know him, you don't get to the bottom of it. You just say, whoa, this guy's got so much going for him that I want to sit here and listen more to what he has to say.
So what other performances have you actually done yourself? Did you do Screw Tape?
Yeah, I did. I did Screw Tape. I'm working on another C.S. Lewis piece. I've done Mark's Gospel. I did a production of Genesis. And then I've done a lot of writing. I did the adaptation of The Great Divorce. Worked with somebody else to do the adaptation of a play called Martin Luther on Trial. It was a wonderful play. And then we also produce other plays as well that have already been written: Man for All Seasons, Shadowlands, etc.
Okay, so how did you? Let's go back into the untold story of Max Mclean. Have you been a Christian your entire life? How did you come to
I'm an adult convert. I came to Christ in my 20s, and it was discovering Jesus in a way that I had never discovered him. And that was through reading John's Gospel, but also meeting some pretty intelligent Christians who led me in that direction. So that was part of it. And then they also led me to Lewis pretty early on.
So did you have an aha moment, a Eureka moment?
Yeah. I was about 23 years old. And after reading John's Gospel, Jesus was going to leap out of the pages. I knew that story was not just only significant and meaningful, but true. And my heart was overwhelmed by the person of Jesus. And so I also recognized instantaneously after that moment that I was loved. And I also realized that all the creation before me at that moment, I would happen to be in a beautiful setting, was created by someone who really cared and loved, that the ultimate reality was righteous and good. and I was also made aware pretty early on. Like that was the first thought that came to my mind. The second thought was that I've been deceived. That there was a alternative power that whose whose purpose was to deceive, and so those two ideas uh, came into my head, into my heart, at my conversion.
And along the way in your career, is there been specific moments where clearly there was divine inspiration or intervention to really have God showing off in your
I would
life?
say my whole life would be that, because uh, one of the interesting things about there's a theological doctrine called providence, and the thing about providence is that it's the meaning of it is God directing the path. It's like He has a plan for you, um, and we don't know it. But the interesting thing about God's plan is it's hard to see in the short term. But I'm in my late 60s now. I came to Christ in my 20s, so that's like a 45-year period. And then you see the hand of God much more clearly. Because and also you see yourself. The thing you don't want to do is compare yourself to other people, but you want to compare yourself to who you were before,
Uh,
and then notice, where you've changed, where you've grown. You know, uh, Lewis says that we have to admit that God rules only a very small part of our lives, and there's a clear line between God's part and the enemy's part, and that our job is to take new ground every day. And that's and that comes through prayer, through fellowship, through walking with the Lord.
Incredible. So now, how about the flip side of that? Is there moments where you thought, "Where's God now? What's going on with this? That an unanswered prayer."
Well, the thing is that prayer is request, right? And the key thing about request is it may or may not be answered. But and we make requests all the time. We ask for salt. We ask somebody to feed the cat while we're on holiday. We ask a woman to marry us. Sometimes we get what we ask for, sometimes we don't. But the thing is that, and also, petition is sort of the least important. It's confession is the threshold, and adoration the sanctuary. So, I tend to see what I call misgivings, or this. I think people get confused because we think of this place as a place where we're supposed to be happy all the time, and in reality, it's more of this life is more of a training ground, of growing, of correction. And when you think that, it really kind of comes into perspective. So you don't have as many. I get disappointments, but they're short term. They don't last long. And the first thought I get is, okay, what's the reason for this? What do I need to do? Yeah. I mean, I'm just so aware of how much grace God has given me. I mean, that's really it, because I don't deserve much of anything, and I look back and I go, I mean, like one thing's, I lose things all the time and I have no right to find them. And
Yes.
yet I do,
Yeah.
so, and that's kind of,
Those are
yeah,
the little, and I've had a couple of those too happen where there was no way, and it was
yeah,
gone forever. But then I would actually literally pray about it, and I look at that as kind of God's little nudge. He's like, "See,
yeah,
I could do this stuff.
yeah. And I can do more than that.
I can do more than." Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Well, so you've dedicated your life pretty much, well, definitely dedicated your life to the performing arts and how the Christian view. You've most of your life has been dedicated to kind of bringing C.S. Lewis to us.
Yeah.
What do you have planned as far as are there more films in your mind?
I think so. It's we kind of fell into filmmaking because of the pandemic, but now it's in our bones now that we want to do more. Film is hard though; it's so hard. It's so competitive, and finding an audience. So you have to really be willing to select the right material. But I also think that, Lewis, as I mentioned earlier, you don't get to the bottom of him. So he's somebody that I'd like to explore again.
Yeah. Well, as much as we've discussed the fact that it is in and out of the movie theaters, the most reluctant convert is now streamable, but I see it as being, this is going to be kind of the premier remembrance or capsule in film of C.S. Lewis, ongoing, and it's not going to go away.
I appreciate that. I hope so.
I never cared for my name, Clive Staples. The world came to know me as C.S. Lewis. Perhaps you read my books. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is the most famous, but there's one story that's not so well known. It's my story. And who better to tell it than me? Cheers.
Shut up! Hey, Jack, no, stop! Don't disturb your father!
Boys! Your mother loves you very much.
At 14, I ceased to be a Christian. She was the first woman to speak to my blood.
I love the smell of bunting.
And I was undone.
Have you nothing to say in your defense?
William Kirkpatrick, the Great Knock.
Either there's no God behind the universe, a God indifferent to good and evil, or worse, an evil God.
Do you believe that logic and reason bring forth indisputable truth?
I do.
And are your moral and aesthetic judgments valid and meaningful?
They are.
For the first time, I examined myself with a serious, practical purpose. What I found appalled me.
How could a mere man be called a great moral teacher and say the sort of things Jesus said?
Such as?
That night, as I read Phantastes, my imagination was baptized. The rest of me took a little longer.
One of the good things about it is it's based on his memoirs, so it uses his words, and that and the main reason was because his words are better than anybody else's. so I wanted to be. I think the thing that makes the film memorable is you're actually listening to the voice of Lewis through my voice, but I'm just a conduit for his words.
Another accolade for you is that you also are the voice of the Listener's Bible.
That's right.
That's right. And that's available. Is it streamable? Is it on a?
Yeah, I think you go like to Bible Gateway or particularly in the NIV or the King James. Those are the two that I do. If you go to the Bible Gateway, if you go to the YouVersion Bible and you plug in the NIV or the King James, you get my voice.
This is Max Mclean. How did Mary find out that she was chosen to be the mother of God's Son? Listen to the Bible from Luke 1. God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town in Galilee, to a virgin pledged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of David. The virgin's name was Mary. The angel went to her and said, "Greetings, you who are highly favored. The Lord is with you. Do not be afraid, Mary. You will be with child and give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over the house of Jacob forever. His kingdom will never end. From Luke 1. Listen to the Bible. It's great for the soul.
Chopped up into little, like minute-long pieces.
Yeah, they can do that too.
Yeah, which is kind of cool because, people these days on the fly, and they're trying to make room for their spiritual life, and this is a way to do that. So, boys, it has been such a total pleasure to get to know you. This is one of these interviews that I've kind of been a little bit intimidated by because you are such a talent, and I'm so impressed with you as an actor and as a human that it's I really appreciate you taking the time and being with us today.
Delighted, Rick. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, God bless you, and I'll be watching and waiting for that next thing.
All right. Thank you. Many blessings. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks for spending some time with us on Amazing Greats. All of the contact information for Max Mclean and how you can stream the movie The Most Reluctant Convert is in the show notes here. I highly recommend, if you haven't already, to become more familiar with C.S. Lewis's works, and particularly the book Mere Christianity, which I loved. I hope you'll share this with your family and friends, and until next time, God bless.